terrorists stormed the U.S. Capitol in an effort to thwart our democratic system of government. In the weeks since, the underlying threat of violence to our government remains a great concern. One of the most important responsibilities of the new administration, of any administration, is to protect our country and its citizens. The Senate must continue the process of confirming President Biden's cabinet by installing Alejandro Mayorkas to serve as Secretary of Homeland Security. In truth, we should have been able to confirm Mr. Mayorkas days ago. He is supremely well qualified for the job. The son of immigrants whose family escaped from the Holocaust, a prosecutor, a veteran of 7 years, who led the agency's response on Ebola, cybersecurity, border security, counterterrorism, and domestic terrorism. Just 4 years ago, President Trump had his Secretary of Homeland Security installed on Inauguration Day. As 4 previous Secretaries of Homeland Security under presidents of both parties wrote recently, after the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th, it is more urgent than ever to have in place an experienced, capable, and Senate-confirmed leader. That person is Mayorkas. That was 4 previous Homeland Secretaries from both parties. Unfortunately, because of the objections of one member, the Senate has not been allowed to vote on this nomination yet. It's the Senate's responsibility to make sure national security officials are on the job, keeping our country safe. My friends on the other side don't have to agree with Mr. Mayorkas on the finer points of every policy. But surely we can all agree that he knows the department, he understands the threats to our nation's security, and has what it takes to lead DHS. The Senate must confirm his nomination in very short order, and we will make sure that happens. We must continue on to the rest of the President's cabinet as well. The President's nominee for Secretary of Transportation was voted out of committee this morning on an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote, 21-3. With cooperation, the Senate can and should confirm Mr. Buttigieg soon as well. Today, President Biden is set to announce a slew of executive actions on climate, including critical measures to increase the conservation of federal lands, reduce oil and gas development, and place environmental justice, green jobs, and yes, science at the heart of our nation's climate policy. I think Americans are saying, welcome back, science. We're glad you're playing a role in the decisions we make and not being ignored, trampled on like the previous administration did. Understanding that the United States cannot defeat a global threat on its own, the Biden administration has already wisely joined the Paris Accords and will also propose convening an international climate summit this year on Earth Day. These executive actions are a very strong opening push by the Biden administration to refocus our nation's energy towards the threat of climate change. President Biden's commitment to deal with climate change is unquestioned. He's off to a fast start, and it couldn't come soon enough. Now, the federal government has a great deal of power to set the direction for our nation's energy and environmental policy. But climate change represents an existential threat to our country and our planet. Every tool in the toolbox should be brought to bear. In my view, President Biden should consider the declaration of a national emergency on climate change. Former President Trump, of course, issued an emergency declaration to divert funds towards an expensive and ineffective border wall when there was no emergency at all. Declaring one for climate change, an actual emergency, would be a giant step in the right direction, and it would allow President Biden to tap additional resources and pursue additional policies in the fight against climate change, even if Republicans in Congress remain intransigent and unable to recognize the severity of this crisis. Japan, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and scores of regional and local governments have declared states of emergency over climate change. The United States would send a powerful signal to the world about our commitment to defeating climate change if we did so as well. Now on COVID. As I mentioned yesterday, the Senate will soon begin the process of considering legislation to help the country defeat COVID-19 and provide relief to those Americans who are still suffering great economic hardship. There's been a lot of action in Washington recently. We inaugurated a new president. A new administration is getting off the ground. An impeachment trial of the former president will commence in a few weeks. But COVID-19 hasn't gone anywhere, unfortunately. Americans are still losing their jobs. American businesses are still closing. Americans are still getting sick. Americans are still dying. The needs in our country are still great, and the country must pursue a bold and robust course of action to defeat the disease and get our country back to normal. We must not repeat the mistakes of 2008 and 2009, when Congress was too timid and constrained in its response to the global financial crisis. The Congressional Budget Office has told us last fall that COVID-19, the pandemic, has taken more than $17 trillion out of our economy. $17 trillion out of the economy. The danger of undershooting our response to COVID-19 is far greater than overshooting it. So Congress must pursue a bold response to the prevailing crisis of our time. Here in the Senate, we want that work to be bipartisan. Let me say that again. We want the next legislative response to COVID-19 to be bipartisan. We want to work with our Republican colleagues, if we can, to include their ideas and input, if they'll offer them. That's our preference. But if our Republican colleagues decide to oppose the necessary, robust COVID relief that is needed, we will have to move forward without them. It's not our preference, but dealing with this crisis in a bold and sufficient way is a necessity. The Senate is going to respond to the country's needs and to deliver help to the American people fast. Now on impeachment. Finally, I want to address the vote the Senate took yesterday on the point of order raised by the junior senator from Kentucky. I regret to say, for 45 Republican senators to vote for a spurious constitutional objection to the coming impeachment trial was deeply, deeply irresponsible. The trial is still 2 weeks away. The constitutional objection has been completely debunked by more than 150 constitutional scholars representing the entire breadth of the political spectrum, including very prominent conservatives. But only 5 Republican senators were willing to take a principled stand against this reckless and ill-advised effort by members of this body who are eager to excuse President Trump's campaign to overturn the election and apparently to excuse his incitement to the mob that every one of us experienced in this Capitol. I would simply say to all of my colleagues, make no mistake, there will be a trial, and the evidence against the former president will be presented in living color for the nation and every one of us to see once again. No one will be able to avert their gaze from what Mr. Trump said and did and the consequences of his actions. We will all watch what happened. We will listen to what happened, and then we will vote. We will pass judgment as our solemn duty under the Constitution demands. And in turn, we will all be judged on how we respond. I yield the floor. I'm glad to see my colleague from Vermont here, as well as my colleague from Illinois.
I thank the distinguished leader.